My name is Joshua Sachs, and I am the Deputy Secretary of Natural and Historic Resources for the Commonwealth of Virginia. And that means I help the governor and the Secretary of Natural Resources, who is also our Commonwealth's Chief Resilience Officer, in doing a number of things to deal with what we call resilience, what is sometimes called flood preparedness or protection, all things having to do with making Virginia stronger when it comes to dealing with extreme weather and sea level rise and climate change, if you wish. Those are all things that are part of my job. I also do a lot of work on land conservation for the governor and environmental permitting and all sorts of things that bundle this up together. And lately, I've been helping a group of people develop something called the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, which is supposed to be an attempt to start to lead the state towards a holistic vision of how we plan for the future when we know that it's flooding right now today and it's only going to get worse. So my colleagues have been leading a series of conversations like the one we're going to have tonight, where they've been going out and wanting to connect with communities and hear from all of you and make sure that we're planning correctly for the long term and we're solving problems of the short term. And that's what this meeting is going to be tonight. Most of these have been covered by my colleagues in the Secretary's office. So this, admitting my first one of these, I hope I do my colleagues justice. If you want to jump in and ask questions or anything like that, let's have a free-flowing conversation. Please feel free, raise a hand. We'll go from there. So what I intend for us to do tonight is I'm going to walk you through a really fast PowerPoint, maybe 10 minutes. And the first part, I'm just going to share with you a little bit of information. And then we're going to have a series of slides with some questions. And perhaps that'll be a good time for you to ask some questions or share some thoughts. And if no one wants to say anything, well, I'll just share some thoughts for you. And there will be people here who are going to be taking notes so that when we go back and continue to work on our master plan or implementing various programs, we have captured what you have said. We've captured your wisdom and we can go work on those problems. So with that, I'm going to sort of launch into my presentation and we'll go from there. Does that sound good to everybody? All right. Let's see if I am PowerPoint fluent. Okay. So as I just said, I spoiled my first slide, but this is sort of the run of show we're going to use. We've done welcome and introductions. And now we'll just talk really briefly about what is coastal resilience. Sometimes people say resiliency, sometimes people say adaptation. Bottom line is what we're talking about is how do we strengthen our communities so that when storms happen, when flood events happen, when bad things happen where water is coming in, we can minimize our damage and be up and running as quickly as possible in a way that is going to keep all the things that are part of a community going, that's going to maintain our public health, our economic drivers, etc. That's what we're talking about when we mean coastal resilience. And like I said, you might hear lots of different words, but the goal here is to make it better for the long term. Now, as we do this planning and we have these conversations, there are all sorts of different hazards that can impact with regard to flooding. And I'm just going to highlight three real quick for you. And I'm sure you have experienced all of them. Tidal flooding happens around here when it's a full moon, when we have tides pushing up, sometimes up our beaches, sometimes up our water outfall pipes, right? And you'll see it back up into neighborhoods. I'm sure everyone in this room has experienced a time where they've been driving home on a day where it hasn't rained and they have to go through kind of a gully of water, right? So everybody with me? Okay, just making sure. The second is storm surge flooding. We see that less. We see it in the news a lot. We saw it with our hurricanes and things. That's what if, knock wood, a category 2, category 3 hurricane pushes up our way. We're going to see really high heights of water coming in at us, and we're going to have to deal with that. And then rainfall flooding is the one I know we're all most used to. Rain is happening differently these days. It's happening more often, and it happens faster in bigger volumes. At the same time, we live in communities with a lot more concrete and a lot less place for the water to go. And in our coastal regions, again, where those outfall pipes are at a place where high tide can coincide, and then there's nowhere for the water to go, we can see tremendous damage. And again, I'm thinking everyone in this room has experienced it that one way or another fairly recently. My family's from Pennsylvania. My father and a lot of his friends just experienced this as a sort of the tale of Irma. And I got a lot of calls saying, hey, did you know flood insurance doesn't cover all of this? We'll get to that down the road. But these are sort of the top three types of flooding that we're trying to deal with as a state and as a region to help everybody here. Just some real quick things to put this in perspective, right? In this region, in the coastal region, about 6 million people live here. That's 70% of our state's population. In recent years, when we've had damage in this region, it has been extreme, over billions of dollars of damage that we can't really recoup all the time. And this slide says Virginia has the highest rate of sea level rise in the East Coast, which is true. Our sea level is coming up quickly. There's something that's missing from this slide, which also is in this region where we have underground aquifers that are draining. Our land is actually sinking at the same time the sea level is rising. So a lot of challenges to deal with. And the point I want to make here is not just that you should know about all these challenges, but if these are our challenges today, they're only going to be worse in 10 years and 20 and 30 years. I think we talked about some of this before, and I'll go real quick, but what's making it flood more? Well, we've talked about weather. We've talked about climate change. We talked about the land subsidence and the rising seas. We mentioned impervious surface and construction happening, more density. I think you've all seen this. I imagine many of you have lived here a long time. None of this is news, but if anyone has a question, you just yell out. Now I just want to show you a little bit more specifics because everywhere you go, people will give you those sorts of generic platitudes like I gave you about sea level rise. But this is what it looks like right here in Norfolk. And if you can see that red arrow, can everyone see the red arrow there? That's supposed to approximate where we are. I'm not the map expert, so if that's off, you tell me. And what you can see is if you look at 2020, which is now, you'll see a fair amount of colors, but also a lot amount of that healthy kind of green, right? Which is those are areas that are not going to necessarily be inundated. And if we look just 40 years in the future, and I used to think that was a long time, but now I'm 42. It doesn't feel that long anymore. And you can see how much more area has filled in with different levels of flood damage. So instead of just talking hypothetically, right, you and I talked before about your flooding in the streets, flooding trying to get to buses. That's how much worse it's going to be in just 40 years if we don't do a lot. And that's why the state feels compelled to engage and try to do more to make this better. This is yet another slide that is going to show you what coastal flooding and impact is going to look like in this area. Just kind of blocked out. But again, the point here is 2020 has a lot less orange and red than 2060. And the takeaway there is things will continue to get worse. Over the next 40 years, our experts believe in Norfolk, our impacts are going to be about 100,000 more people coming here, about 30,000 more buildings, about 13,500 more acres of land that will be developed, or pardon me, that could be inundated or impacted. So again, just want to make the point that this is a really big deal. Sometimes when we come to a room like this and there's just 12 of us here and it's a quiet Tuesday night, maybe it doesn't feel as big of a deal as it is, but this is incredibly serious, I think, for the sort of safety of us all and the continuance of the Commonwealth. So now we're going to the point where we pivot, and I'm going to stop talking at you and I'd like to talk with you. And I've mentioned some of this, but I think let's talk about what flooding looks like for you, right? I could tell you what flooding looks like generically. I know we have some standing water and stuff, but if we could, I'd be curious to hear from some of you what it is that you're experiencing right now and what it is that you're worrying about. Is that too much to ask? Does anyone feel like helping out? We got a microphone there if you're interested. We have a shy bunch tonight. That's fair.
Pretty often, but not like just from high tides. The roads get blocked off in 2 or 3 sections.
Yeah.
People drive through, but it's salt water, brackish water. So, and that's a pretty regular thing, probably at least once a week, I would say right now. So
What scares me about that sort of regular flooding that you see once a week right now is that, to me, that's an indicator that in, I don't know how many years, it's going to be 5 days a week or 7, or maybe the road is gone. And I think part of what we're trying to do is strike the balance of how do we protect that in the short term, but also do things so that we're thriving in the long term. Right. Anyone else have any sort of thoughts? Yes, sir.
I also, Mayflower Drive is on the Lafayette River.
Yeah.
I live on the Lafayette River. And I live fairly close to Hampton Boulevard. We believe that, except for downtown area, this is the area of Norfolk that has the most at risk. Hampton Boulevard at the bridge over the Lafayette River is the primary thoroughfare to the Norfolk Naval Base, the largest employer of the region. And if that gets blocked, well, probably we're going to need a partnership with the federal government to do something. I also want to say that the neighborhoods on the Lafayette River have the largest aggregate residential tax base of Norfolk, and they're at risk for the economy. And we believe that the long-term solution, which is prohibitively expensive, would be a floodgate across the mouth of the Lafayette River. It will preserve that thoroughfare, the major thoroughfare to the Norfolk Naval Base, as well as help protect the largest residential tax base in the city. Thank you.
So that's a wonderful juxtaposition, right, of the two sort of things, right? Gentleman in the back, forgive me, I don't know your name, but right, a very near-term problem with potentially a somewhat near-term solution, right? Maybe we could elevate that segment. Maybe there's something there that can be done. A situation like this, the Lafayette River, which is more of an existential long-term thing, and you're right, something that would cost billions of dollars, but also the kind of thing the state is thinking about right now and more than ever before. And we're going to talk a little bit later about some of our master plan stuff. But that is our goal, is to figure out, there will be places where we have to do billion-dollar projects, billion-dollar structural flood control projects. And the place where that's going to be is likely the 7 cities. Which one, which exact river? That's a state priority that is way above my pay grade, right? And I think that's something that through this master planning process and other things we need to kind of harmonize. But I think that the state is in agreement with you that we need to be able to do some really big projects like that to sustain this region. I think we're at a phase where we're still trying to figure out which the best ones are and how to pay for them. Yes.
Well, I can read.
Okay.
Flooding looks like a concern for some homes, damage to the foundation, and a cost that some homeowners cannot continue to incur, not to mention the cost of flood insurance. It can also look like a problem with keeping people in the area if they choose to relocate in the area. sorry. It also looks like a problem with keeping people in the area if they choose to relocate to areas that don't experience the issues we experience here. Secondly, we have Cheryl White, who says, I'm the ED of the Elizabeth River Trail Foundation. The trail regularly experiences flooding along several sections of the 10.5-mile trail. We are actively trying to plan the trail to align with larger resiliency efforts in the region. The trail can easily be a bridge, a connector, or a sponge.
Were all those questions by the same person, or who asked the first part?
Onicia Howard.
Onicia. Okay.
Yeah, and we'll obviously.
So just I'm gonna answer both of those questions, but first I'm just gonna jump to our next slide, which was just a few more questions to jog the conversation, because I think that, well, frankly, you've kind of jumped to some of them already, and it made sense to move to that slide. So that said, I think Onicia was raising some issues about the cost of living in an area that is prone to flooding, and particularly the cost for people who have repetitive losses, who are seeing flood insurance rates increase greatly, and maybe who don't necessarily have the full amount of resource to do something on their own. This is such a hard question. And frankly, it's one I think that I see some tensions in the state, because there are two options, I think, in this case. And the first option is we could try to go house by house and put them up on stilts, or elevate roads, or floodproof basements, or add generators. And those would be helpful to that particular person, but I don't think it solves the bigger problem. And what we have started to do through our master planning process and other things, what we as a state are hoping that the new vision of planning for resilience looks like is that we don't just help you with some short-term resistance to flooding, but we help you with long-term resilience. So to do that, we can't do that house by house, structure by structure. That means we need to be doing either big community scale things, so like protecting the Lafayette River, or protecting a large beach segment, so we're buffering areas. Or it means that over time, we need to help rethink how we develop, and if catastrophe strikes and a house needs to be rebuilt, can we rebuild it in a slightly safer way? And I understand, we talked about tax base before and things, that's a really complicated issue. But at the end of the day, the water's only going to get worse. If you look at the news, if you've seen, the loss of life in the Northeast right now, every time I see another hurricane forming out in the Gulf, I get scared. So we need to also start to look to some of those longer term solutions. And that's what we're trying to do. And that's why we're here talking to people, so we find that right balance. Is there anything else people want to talk about that? Are there any flooding experiences or questions you want to talk about? Or shall I move on to sort of some basic kind of best management practice stuff, and then we'll talk a little bit about the master plan to close it out? Yes, sir.
I just have a question. Sure. So I came a little bit late. I apologize. Had a hard time finding this room.
Me too. No worries.
But is this meeting kind of talking about the general flooding that goes on every day? Or are we talking about a hurricane, like you said, and a surge tide of 10 feet and additional 3 feet of rain? I wondered this at the very least, could everybody get out of Virginia Beach and Norfolk? Is there enough road capacity for that many people to evacuate this area safely at one time? That seems to be more concern to me than actually, houses are houses, they're replaceable, but people aren't. So that's what I see as the biggest concern to me. I've only been in the area for like a year now. I've owned the place for 4 years, but it's a little worrisome to me.
Well, first, that was a great segue. I'll just give you a sneak peek at what my next slide was going to be.
Josh, do you mind if I share just one more example from the chat that folks want me to read out loud?
Sure.
Okay. So great transition over there, but just one more. This is from Brad Lazarnik. I live in the West Ghent neighborhood, and we often get flooding since the roads were not graded well. when resurfaced, and large portions of the curbs have sunk so water does not get diverted properly. And I believe that is all that is from online.
Okay. So, all right, let's just start on the back to sort of on the issue of curbs sinking and stuff. There are certain, I'll just say, there are a lot of smaller things that exacerbate flooding, failing curbs, clogged culverts, eroding shorelines. Those all are part of the problem. Solving those are things I consider more in some of the shorter term than the longer term. And as I said, we're working to do both. And that's hard. We're trying to sort of solve a lot of problems at once. But to your question, sir, about kind of preparedness or response, I'll just say a couple things. First, I will steal a hackneyed, I believe, football quote. I'm not a big football guy, but I think the best defense is a good offense. Is that right? Is that football? Okay. So the best thing we can do to be able to be responsive to storms, to help people evacuate and weather the storm, is first and foremost be resilient to the storm. So they don't have to necessarily evacuate, so they can weather the storm, so function can return quickly with regard to electricity or essential services. And that's the stuff that I am most focused on in my work. And that's what we're sort of talking about today. But nonetheless, Virginia, the Department of Emergency Management, in partnership with FEMA and others, certainly recognize that disaster response is incredibly important. And they would ask me to tell you things like, if we can have more people know where they get disaster information from, follow the state VDEM Twitter, or go to the governor's website, or stay tuned to your local news. Do people know sort of all those right sources? Do you know your evacuation route? There is evacuation plans for this whole region. In fact, Governor Northam has triggered some of those plans during his tenure and called for evacuation. So do you know your zone? Do you know when you're watching TV and they call for you? If you are someone who unfortunately doesn't have a car, do you have a plan? Do you have an uncle? Do you have a cousin? Do you have a way to do something like that? And those are all really important. And those are things that, unlike some of what we're talking about today in this macro planning, do take a little more personal responsibility. But I guess I would just recommend that people avail themselves of that. And to the extent that tonight I can connect you with any of those resources, I would love to do that. And we'll sort of take it from there. Is that a fair enough answer? Okay. The last thing here, do you have flood insurance? Do you guys have flood insurance? Okay. No? Okay. I have done flood insurance work for much longer than I've been working in Virginia. I was really involved with the response to Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Ida, Superstorm Sandy, and I've been to a lot of places that flood. And the most common thing I hear is, but we never flooded before. You wouldn't believe it. And I have really good friends who are really smart people who do this kind of work with me and live on shoreline property and say, yeah, but it's 6 inches. Well, I mentioned my family earlier, and the Schuylkill River up where they live crested at 17 feet a week and a half ago. So you just never know where it's coming. If you live in a high hazard flood zone, your flood insurance may be expensive. In that case, the state wants to do what it can to help reduce your rate. That might mean by doing things to help your community do more protections or other things. But if you can, it is the best thing in the world for you to have flood insurance. As much as the state or the federal government wants to do for you, nothing like flood insurance. Another quick slide from my friends, with regard to disaster preparedness. If you see water, if it looks like a small amount of water, if it's just a foot of water and you think you might be able to drive through it, often that is not the case. I imagine many of you live here and you're kind of aware of that, or you've seen those horror stories a small amount of water can lift a vehicle or a shed or something and move it much more than one might expect. So always be careful. We talked about flood insurance a second ago. There's this thing called Know Your Zone. And there are certain people who have to have flood insurance, and there are certain people for whom flood insurance would be very cheap. And there are certain people for whom flood insurance will tell you not only do you have a likelihood of flooding, but you have a likelihood of waves crashing into your property. So there is a website for that, and we encourage you to go to it and know your zone and prepare properly. There are hazard mitigation plans and evacuation plans for the Commonwealth, and you should check those out as well.
Josh, we have those materials here for those who like to take them home.
Wonderful. There's a table out front, and everyone should feel free to grab those. And I think there's probably some cool know your risk water bottles too. So some good, no bottles today. Okay. Did you, yes, sir?
Choke points within Norfolk.
Yeah.
That are going to cause the worst problems are the underpasses where the railroad goes across near 21st Street. That's Hampton Boulevard, Colley Avenue, and I believe the other one's on Monticello Avenue. And those, as long as 20 years ago, when we have heavy rains, they have flooded to the point that you couldn't go through them, or if you did, your car would, you'd lose your car, or at least the use of your car. And that's an immediate thing that ought to be addressed. That's not long term. We have to do a better job of dealing with those underpasses under the railroad near 21st Street.
That's another great segue, and I thank you for it. So the last thing I want to talk to you all about today is sort of this big effort that's been going on in Virginia over the past 2 years, perhaps, maybe longer, to create a comprehensive plan for how we're going to deal with all this stuff. And you see up here, there's some language. Essentially, our plan is going to provide support for these regions to figure out what to do, how to deal with climate change, how to empower communities and protect vulnerable communities and not leave anyone behind, and both address the issues of today as well as be fiscally smart and be planning for the long-term issues of tomorrow. Because if I just solve today's problems, when tomorrow comes, well, I wouldn't have done my job. So I want to tell you all about that because I'd encourage everyone to get engaged in one way or another. So there's some slides here that I'm not going to get into a lot. These are just sort of various parts of what's involved, but let me just talk about it. So here's the deal. We need to figure out how Virginia is going to make a plan to keep us protected and spend hundreds of millions or billions of dollars to do it. And we need to do it in a way that we're going to protect the most people, and we're going to do it equitably. So we're protecting all types of communities. We also need to protect our critical assets. We need to protect our military bases and our economic drivers and our shipyards. And on top of that, most people would prefer us to keep everything how it is and keep them in place and just make it all better and safer. And that is a challenge that is, well, frankly, just really, really challenging. So as we develop this plan right now, we've reached out to all these localities, including the city of Norfolk and Hampton and others, and they've come to us and they've said, okay, well, we've got some really big projects and we want to protect some land here and we want to do some floodgates and things. And they've also said, and we want to put a new stormwater culvert in over here at the corner of Main and Broad, right? And we're going through the process right now of evaluating those and trying to decide which ones we're going to fund. You know, we're dedicating a lot of money to this, but this is where all of you come in. You know your communities better than we do. I'm sure you know this area better than I do. If anyone has a good dinner recommendation afterwards, let me know. But we can't make a good plan unless we hear from people in the community. And we've talked to your elected officials. We've talked to them and they've said what their priorities are. But there's a chance it doesn't cover everyone else's priorities. There's a chance that your neighborhood or your corner gets left out. And we want to make sure that's not happening. And that's sort of why we're here today. And this plan's going to continue. There's a citizen group that's involved. I'm going to introduce Skip Stiles here from Wetlands Watch. Sorry to put you on the spot there, but Skip is one of the members of this group, the technical advisory committee, who's helping to put it together. And we want you to keep talking to them and help us develop a great plan. And there's a little bit more information here about how you can follow along, some websites and things. But essentially, that's the gist. And what we're trying to do is create a plan that will provide short-term resistance and long-term resilience. We're trying to recognize that we can't just do business as usual as much as we want to. It's got to change a little bit. And we're trying to find that right amount of change. So we're doing good, but not going too hard, too fast. So that's pretty much what I wanted to tell all of you about today. And I'm sorry for those of you who are just joining, you can catch the second show. There's no second show. But if anyone else has any thoughts, if you have any questions, if you want to talk, let's just talk. And for those of you who were not here before, I'm the Deputy Secretary of Natural Resources. So I know enough to be dangerous. And I'm happy to sort of mix it up. So is there anything else people would like to discuss?
Josh, you want to go back to the slides to prompt some questions for those who came later?
Sure.
Have you guys already started funding projects around here, and if so, what kind of projects were they? I didn't know if this was like something you're building up to and you're getting ready to start putting money into the community, or if it's something that you've already been doing and just wanted to talk more about it.
I'm going to give you a sort of complicated answer, and I'm sorry. But yes, we are starting to put money in the communities starting next month. And that is because Virginia, under Governor Northam's leadership, joined this thing called RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Inventory. And that's a regional carbon trading, cap and trade sort of scheme. And we generate money from carbon credits when companies have to buy them. We just had our third auction actually earlier this week. Virginia's bringing in a lot of money, about $50 million a cycle every quarter on that. And we are one of the only states that says we're going to dedicate half that money to resilience. So we've created this fund, the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. It's actually a fund to benefit the whole state, the whole Commonwealth, but certainly a lot's going to come to this region. And the first grant round for that fund, that brand new fund we've created, they're going to spend about $16 million, and the grant round is closed. And right now we're evaluating, we're picking the projects. So shortly we'll have an answer on that. Now, this master plan I'm talking about, that's supposed to go further and pick kind of the best projects that all fit together in a big suite. And where we are on that is we've gotten recommendations from all the related localities, and we're trying to figure out how to tier it and rank it and score it. So with that regard, we're still working on that piece, but on the flood fund, we're going to start pumping money into your communities in about a month. Yes, absolutely. So when we start a grant round, so there's a web page you can go to on the Department of Conservation and Recreation's webpage that'll tell you about the grant and things like that. And the second grant round has actually already begun. So you can read about that. And then once we make awards, there'll be a press release and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. So the best place to find that is dcr.virginia.gov. And if you just do a simple Google search of our Community Preparedness Fund, that should come up. Any press releases that come out of the governor's office, you can just generally sign up for, but they will also be all on that website. That's where they would live moving forward.
But here's one other, so that fund is, the people who can apply for that fund are localities or planning district commissions. So let's say you wanted something to happen on your block, right, to deal with flooding. you should make sure that the city is asking for that, for this fund, because that's how you as a citizen make sure you get the thing that you're hoping to get. It's okay.
Like which department is from our, like, in the city is asking for money, or is it the city in general that's asking for funding?
So when it
Because they-
comes to my sort of thing, I see it as the city, but I'm sure every city has like an office that deals with it. I think there's some people from the city here. I don't know if anyone has that answer. Skip, do you know that? Who in?
There's a whole group of an interagency group that works with the city manager here in Norfolk. So I would get a hold of Chip Filer, who's the city manager, and ask him where you can go to suggest a project.
Thank you.
Oh, that's right. And yeah. And city council's meeting tonight, so there's another group.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Paul Robinson with Rise.
I
Sorry I
know
was
who you are,
late.
Paul. It's good to see you.
Blippi the musical is on across the road, and it's really kind of hard to get across Hampton Boulevard
Oh, wow.
right now.
I don't know what that is.
Neither do I, but
Okay.
it's very busy.
Okay.
Are the proposed projects, are they public when they're submitted? Are they available? Can the public look at what's been submitted?
Right. So for the master plan,
I'm talking about for the fund, for for
yeah, for the,
funds for the protection, the flooding protection program.
the Community Flood Preparedness Fund will publish all of the grantees. I frankly don't know if they will publish those that are not funded or roll them into a new round. Or I'm not sure on that. My guess would be likely they are mostly going to focus on the projects that are funded. Of course, though, that would all be, I think, public information. If you were to ask for it, the agencies would be compelled to give it. Yeah, I think you can also ask your locality, right? What they've applied for is another way to do it.
Yeah, the resiliency office, which most of the cities in Hampton Roads have. I'll also just read off one question. Brad Lazarnik says, I work for senior services of Southeastern Virginia, the area agency on aging. And I'm wondering if there are specific plans on how Norfolk and the surrounding cities would evacuate seniors and those with disabilities who do not have family or friends who can help them.
It's a great question, and I apologize. It's not one I can answer. That evacuations in disaster response is the Department of Emergency Management. The way I explain it sometimes is it's my job up until the storm hits to help us get ready. But when people come in helmets and vests, that's the other team. And once they're done is when we come back into play. Yes, sir.
Hi.
Hi.
Okay. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'm a little confused. This guy here, a lot of traffic. My name is Raytron White. I'm in Norfolk, Virginia residence. And my neighborhood got the Ohio Creek project. And it's a disaster to our neighborhood. It's a disaster to our neighborhood. We have children. We have over 500 children that go to school. We have 2 schools in one neighborhood. And they promised us a whole lot of stuff. And they told us, showed us pictures and stuff. And part of our neighborhood is a little low income. Some of it's middle class income. And then we have another neighborhood adjacent to our neighborhood. It's called Chesterfield Heights. Is one of the premier neighborhoods in the city of Norfolk. And we're catching hell over there. And they asked us to be on the boards and doing this kind of stuff and that kind of stuff. And we can't even get out of our own neighborhood. We have one way in against the law for some of the stuff they're doing. And we've asked the city, and they promised us for the kids going back to school, They will have some things. We don't have a sidewalk for the kids to walk on with trucks and tankers. We have a pre-K4 school. And there's little brothers and sisters walking to school, then they're going to the elementary school. There's no, if you come out there, it's a disaster. There's no signs are up, and we went through all this kosher stuff, and they're not really finding, a way for us to even cope with what they're going to do. It's going to be beautiful in the long run, but now we're in now, and kids are going to school, and I'm afraid that some young child, some baby is going to get hurt because of the planning, the poor planning of it. They didn't think that it was a resident where kids were staying. So, and we're still getting flooding. They put some of the stuff, most of the stuff down, and it's still flooding in our neighborhood. So I just don't know. And I'm trying to make sure that our students and our kids and our families are safe out there. But it's, we've been to the city 3 or 4 times, and we just got lights at night out there, and it's really, really rough. We're right on the water. We're right on the water.
Yeah.
And, we haven't had much flooding. We have more flooding now than we had before the contract started. And my belief, they gave the city of Norfolk almost $200-some million for that project. And it's a hellhole for us. I don't know what can we do to make it more easier, or do we have anybody that can police what they're doing to make sure that the neighborhoods are safe? Because we're in a disaster. If a big storm come now, all the mud and there's no concrete down, we're gonna really be up the creek, my grandma would say.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear that. That's too often I hear stories like that. So I think you and I probably should have a longer conversation offline, but let me ask you just a quick question. It sounds like there are a whole lot of issues going on there, and there are safety issues and others, and then the flooding issue. And I don't know if, did one cause the other, or they just you guys, a lot of issues all swirling together?
Well, we got the grant
Yeah.
about 4 or 5 years ago before we started, and they put some of the residents, as me and myself, on the planning committee to get stuff that we needed. And as they were going, we told them we're a working neighborhood and we're functionable neighborhood. So they promised us to have things that were going to work in the benefit of the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Everything they told us was not true. And then COVID came. And before COVID, they took everything, a play park, everything, the kid could go rec center, all, and they closed it down.
Yep.
They have over 500 kids to live out there. And they told us one thing, they kept telling us another, and they kept, we're gonna build this, we're gonna build that. And we have a big space, it's probably about, I guess, 3.5 acres. They said it's gonna make skateboards and play parks and all. They changed their mind and made a big field for a concert. They have no play park. The play park is part of the neighborhood in Chesapeake Heights where the seniors live.
Yeah.
These people are 70, 80 years old. They got kids playing in the front door. It's not how it was working. So they had plans, and then they told us one thing and did another. So, to have that stuff in Norfolk, I don't know where they're going next with this flooding.
Yeah.
But our neighborhoods are suffering, and we have more flooding now than we were having before it started.
Okay. And let's catch up offline, because I'd like to hear more about this and see what I can do. This isn't necessarily all stuff that's in my issue area, but I do know some people. So we'll talk. But just want to make one macro point for everybody here, right? Which is, this is one of the things that comes up a lot when you deal with flooding and flooding with cost, right? And it's, people have heard the term environmental justice, and that was sort of came to be about people being near pollution. But a new kind of environmental justice, as we continue to see all, these exacerbations of flooding, is are we protecting all communities, or are we driven by tax base alone, or things like that? And it's something that we're really committed to with our master plan to doing better at. Even with the community flood fund I mentioned a moment ago, in statute, it says that 25% of that needs to be set aside for our low-income communities or communities of need. In the scoring criteria for that flood fund, we give a much more generous match to communities of need. So, we're doing some things, but it's a hard thing to get right. And that's why I think my number one message, and the reason for having meetings like this, is to say, without voices like all of yours, to say, wait, but what about that thing? Or what about us? We're not going to have the best master plan or the best kind of vision. And that's what we're trying to do. What else would anyone like to chat about? Yes, sir.
So just I know around our neighborhood in Colonial Place, and I think in other places around the area through Norfolk, they're talking about putting the power lines underneath the ground. Makes total sense with all the big trees and, it's a good idea. But the part I can't understand, I try to have the Dominion lady explain this to me, is why don't they just use the property that belongs to the city already, that right away where the telephone poles are? So they're going through all the neighborhoods trying to get people to put the transformers in their front yards, like a 3x3 by whatever transformer, and nobody really wants that. But if it's on your property, or I don't know if it's yours, the city's, why do you have to ask? You just do it. I don't see how that's making any sense to me, to try to get every resident to say, yeah, you can put it on my property, because it's not going to happen. There's too many houses that would just take away from the looks of them completely.
I hear you. And sadly, this is another problem that I'm not smart enough to solve. And the mission kind of what we're trying to do is protecting buildings, roads, things like that. Although I am so aware that electricity lines are key elements of infrastructure. Our plan hasn't thus far kind of taken that stuff on. And interestingly enough, no city or locality has reached out to the governor's office to say, this is a priority for us. That doesn't mean it's not happening. It just means it's something I don't know about. But on the plus side, I think what your comment is a reminder of is once we start to say, like, we want to be more resilient, we want to be able to stand up to these storms, it can mean so many things. It can be overwhelming, right? It's the electricity grid, it's servers, it's Wi-Fi and cell phone towers and hospitals and roads. And I think also part of planning like this is to realize that we got a lot of things to do and we need to sync them right. And we need to spend time thinking about each one. And that's what we're trying to do. And I hate standing up here saying I don't know the answer, but what I can tell you is we're trying to get to a point where we're going to figure some stuff out and be able to give some broader guidance from the state level to help localities deal with this.
Saying things together, because the power company says they're just taking the power lines and put them down underground. They're not taking any of the communication lines and doing the whole thing together at one time. It doesn't make any sense to me. It's like, why do you want to do this twice? You know what I mean?
Right.
If it's- if
And
it's
but
in
also
sync, the town plans like, this is what we want to do, and we're going to do it all underground, or I guess the money,
Yeah.
it's probably a lot of money. I understand that, but
I know so little about fiber optic cable that you have hit the end of my depth. I apologize. What else? Yes, ma'am.
Just curious. So it seems like this meeting is more like you're letting us know that you guys are doing this. There's money coming at us any second now for these wonderful things that you guys are doing. But what information do you need from us, citizen-wise? It seems like these are very specific things that people are talking about that are city related, or there might be somebody else that has the answer that isn't here. So what do you need from us? Is there information that we can give you that you're asking for?
So you are giving us the information while I may just be up here having fun. My colleagues around the room are taking notes
Okay.
about all the things you say. And we've been doing a lot of these meetings, and I can tell you, I've seen pages and pages from all the different meetings of this was brought up and this was brought up and stuff. And we don't know what we don't know. And we want to make a plan that isn't just what we think, but is good for Virginians. So you're doing it now.
Yeah.
And the other piece I would just say is don't leave anything out. If there's something else you want to talk about, whether it's, a macro concern about global climate change, or it's about the culvert on your corner, let's hear about it.
And Delcino is going to bring over these maps that we're bringing to all of our community meetings and some markers that if there are any areas you want to make sure that we know are either flooding or issues that you're having on different stretches of road or neighborhood, hopefully, brings them around just in a few minutes and we'll be able to kind of this will be an activity in the room. So folks online can just send us an email if you have any details, but that should be helpful to us as well.
That's awesome.
Does that make sense? Was that
Yeah,
satisfying?
yeah, that's exactly what I was, yeah, so making a map and
Yep.
marking, highlighting the ones that we know of and yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you.
The reason why I'm here because, I'm a citizen of the this kind of money support to our city. Coming from military, I was born here. And to do something behind closed doors, and at the end of the day, in the long run, the residents in that neighborhood was going to suffer. My suggestion is the city to plan, when you plan, bring everyone to the table. We had incidents in our neighborhood that we had the police department and ambulance to come out. They did not know where to go. They got stuck in mud trying to get around to one part of the neighborhood. So the planning of a master plan of when we're doing this to Norfolk, City of Norfolk, everybody needs to be at the table. And that's where they're lacking, because if you don't, the post office, the school, no one knows what's going on, but the plan is downtown. I don't think that works. You can't just cook nothing. You have a recipe. You just can't cook a whole dinner and not know what you're going to cook. And everybody else know, it's just the planning of the master plan in Ohio Creek has been really in shambles because no one knows. I have to call the police department, the ambulance, the first to respond and tell them how to get in. Oh, we didn't know the streets were closed. How you do not, in the city is doing, this is their project. So that's when we're in residents, we're at the end of the day, we're suffering. And it shouldn't have to be like that. It shouldn't have to be, you come to us with a plan and you ask us, if you do your part, we've done our part and the project will be done, but it's not like that in our part of the neighborhood in the city of Norfolk.
Understood. Let me just say, so the project you're talking about was not part of this effort. It was part of a prior administration, right? This effort, and I wasn't there for that, and I don't want to pass judgment on the work of my colleagues or things, but I do understand and take seriously your concerns. Yeah, but let me say this, right? So what is different for starters now is that we started with this kind of framework of broad principles, and 4 of them. And one of them is no community left behind. Right. And I think we didn't write this in our document, but at least amongst our team, we're big believers in the not about us without us. Right. I really believe that it can't be good. It can't work otherwise. So we're trying. And I'll be honest that it's hard to find all the right people. If I could find 1 million of you or 1 million of all of you here in this room who on a Tuesday night said, I want to come out and talk about this issue with some weird government people, I'd have it made in the shade, but it's hard. And what we're trying to do is step by step, baby step by baby step, get better. So tonight I'm here talking to all of you. And if you would go tell a friend and you can tell them where I am and they can call me or come to the next meet, we're going to be here next Monday in Hampton, I think. Anyway, we'll be down in this area next week. And that's just how you got to build something like this. And I know that that's slower than we all want, and it's tedious. And I wish I had a better answer for you, but that's my genuine answer of how we're trying to do it. And I hope that you can see that we're trying to do it better and to do good. Yeah. Great. Is there anything else?
So so September 20th, we will be in Newport News. That will be at, and I'm putting this in the chat as well, but at the Downing Gross Cultural Arts Center. And this will also be on the Natural Resources website, as well as the Secretary's Twitter. which is VA Natural Resource or Nat Resources. And then on October 21st, September 20th, we'll be in Newport News. September 21st, we will be in Hampton at the HR CAP, which is 1919 Commerce Drive, also available online. All of these will be hybrid options as well. And then lastly, there's a series of other meetings I'll send out too, but and then on October 5th, we will be in Hampton, and that will be at the Thomas Nelson Community College. Yeah, one of the things that we've asked folks to do is you can email that resilience and you can just let me know directly. But for those who have seen the email address, if you would like a community meeting in your community, please reach out to us and we can provide some resources.
We don't have a quota even. We'll come for 10.
Yeah, we don't really have a limit.
But they come out in our neighborhood.
Yeah.
Found it where now in this book here?
We'll give you our card afterwards and we can work it out.
Absolutely.
Yep.
All right,
Yep,
thank you.
absolutely.
Okay. It seems like, Skip, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say to your problem, I was down to the Grandy Village Center the other day, and you're absolutely right. You know, once you get off the interstate, you get back to where those buildings were torn down around Grandy Village, you can't find your way through there. And when you try to find your way up to the apartments in Grandy Village, it's a complete mystery. So yeah, it is a problem. The problem is frankly with the city of Norfolk, because there should be better signage down there. That project has been in the works, as you know, for years. It's an old project where the city got $125 million from HUD, and they're redeveloping it. And it's going to be really nice when it's finished. But I tried to get from Grandy Village to see a friend of mine over on Chesterfield, and even that was a mess. So it is crazy, and the signage is a mess. But again, you know, that's not on these folks, that's on the city.
To the residents of our area to tell them, you know, they gave us they painted a beautiful picture. Absolutely. They pulled the red carpet out, and it took them a year to give us the new plans. And when the new plans they were already building the stuff. And who don't know your house but you? We know what's going to work and what's not going to work. When they asked us to come out and had all this fancy food and stuff, and then something is different. So, and some of the stuff they see at night, the flood still comes. So I just want to figure out more information. So when I go back to them, I can say, well, I went to a seminar and they told me some other things about flood issues that you are not doing and should be done. That's why I'm here, really to trust to find more information, because getting information for the city and from the companies doing it, it's like a dead end street for us.
A house is a piece of property, but there's nothing more important than your home.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I just want to make sure I can find so many elements so I can tell the residents when I have my meetings, this is what I found out. This is what they're trying to do. That's why they're doing this. That's why they're doing that. But our main concern is it's really nothing. You just get lost out there.
We're going to help you out, and we appreciate you coming and standing up for your community. So I think we're sort of at the point now where we're going to wrap up the formal presentation part, if that's okay. And I just want to say thank you all for coming out. You've listened, and I think you understand what we're trying to do and why we're trying to do it and how important all your buy-in is. And I think what we're going to do now before we leave is we're putting some maps out that I believe should be the local area. And we're going to hang out a little while if people want to visit and chat. And if you want to help show us on maps where there's some problems or things you think we should know about, we'd love to see it. And if not, that's okay too. So with that, thank you all so much. And I think, is that Delcino, Miriam, are we ready to? Yep. All right. Okay, and I'm supposed to tell you that this has been recorded and this will be posted online. And I think we're going to sign off for those who are watching virtually now. So thank you all and have a wonderful evening.